y'all. How are you? Happy return from spring break. I hope that you had a great week off and that you had some time to enjoy the fresh air and the sunshine and that you're ready for the last 3 months of sixth grade. So today we are going to be in our Decimal Ops workbook, which is the green workbook that I gave you before break, and we are on page 14. So make sure that you have the workbook, make sure that you have a pencil. I'm going to be going through a couple things. It's all review today, things that you should know from 4th and 5th grade, but we need to review it in order to get ready for the 6th grade standards that we're going to be tackling with decimals. Now I have good news and I have bad news. So the bad news is this video is probably going to be a little bit longer than normal just because I'm going to be covering a couple of different topics. The good news is we all come back to school on April 19th. Yeah. So this is one of your last at-home work days that you'll ever have to listen to my voice through a video. So that's exciting. So my suggestion is maybe not do it all in one sitting. If you need to pause and you need to take a break, or you pause and you go to Lang and Lit or science or whatever in between. But you do need to make sure that you watch the whole video and that you get everything done, as I will be checking your workbooks when you come to school tomorrow. All right. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to do a quick place value review. And we've done a little bit of this already this year. So just remember, decimals are parts of a whole. They're leftover pieces just like a fraction. So that being said, if I wanted to write 1 and 2/10, I could also write it as 1 and 2/10. And the reason that I know that this is 2/10 is because it's sitting in the tenths place. So that's the important thing to remember is your place values. And you guys know your place values pretty well, especially your whole number place values. So we've got ones, tens, hundreds, then you've got your thousands, millions, billions. And then remember, going to the right, there is no ones place. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000s, hundreds, thousands, all the way on and on and on and on. But we usually will look at decimals in these three place values. Bring me the Oreos and tell her thanks is a way to remember, but I don't think that you guys really need that reminder in 6th grade. You guys are pretty good with your place values. So important, and I know that sometimes I joke with you about this in class, but it is really important that you know how to say a decimal the correct way, not 9.2, 16.863. That is not the correct mathematical way to say a decimal. So remember that you say the number to the left of the decimal point, and then the decimal is and then you say the number to the right. So 9 and 2/10, 16 and 863 thousandths. So kids get a little bit caught up sometimes when we're looking at bigger numbers. So on the whole number side, numbers are broken into periods: billions, millions, thousands, and then your units, hundreds, tens, ones, are periods. So you guys know that if you're looking at a really large number, you say the number within each of those periods, and a period is separated by this comma. So the 1 would be in a period, the 234, the 567, and the 892. So we would say 1, and the name of the period, billion, 234 million, 567,892. So you say it by period is how you would say a larger number. Okay, sorry about that. Child needed me. Okay, so let's more importantly talk about what happens when we have decimals. Okay, so kids really struggle with how do we pronounce the decimal side. So my motto is, if you can say it, you can write it. So you say the digits. So you don't even look at that decimal point. You just pretend that it's not even there. You say the number as it would be, and then the end is the place value of the last decimal digit. Okay, and then don't forget that and for the decimal point. So here is an example. So let's just pretend for right this second, and I'm going to make this big, that this wasn't, oops, too far, that this wasn't here. Okay, you would just say 365, right? But because there's a decimal point there, you would say 1 and 365, and then you need to think about the place value that the 5 is sitting in. Well, it's sitting in the thousandths place, so it's 1 and you say the number 365 thousandths. Okay, so I'm going to give you a number. I want you to write this underneath on your paper. So here's the number. So this is a decimal point in case that didn't really come out that great. Let me redraw that there. Okay, so I want you to write this number on this blank spot on your workbook page. And what I would like for you to do right now is I want you to pause the video and I want you to write in words how you would say this number. Okay, use your place value chart if you need to. I want you to look at the number. Remember that on the whole number side, we're looking at each period is how we're going to break up that number. And then you're going to say the number on the decimal side and name it after the last digit's place value. And don't forget the and. So I'm going to pause my video. You're going to pause yours, write it, and then unpause to see how you did. All right, how'd you do? 1,357,086 and 928 thousandths. So pat on the back to you if you got it correct. If you didn't get it correct, take a look at where you may have made your mistake, fix it, and we're going to move on. All right, so on the next page, again, this is just a reminder of how you normally can write decimals. Standard form is just a number. So whenever you hear standard form, they just want number form. Number form is another way of saying standard form. Expanded form, we don't really do too much in 6th grade. You do this a lot more in the lower grades when you're learning values of place values and whole numbers and things like that. But you might see it. And then word form is what we just did, just being able to write a number in words rather than using the numbers. And you do need to be comfortable doing both, going from words to numbers and numbers to words in 6th grade. All right, so that's pretty much just a review of place value. Now we're going to move on to comparing and ordering decimals. So seeing which one's bigger, seeing which one's smaller. So remember when we're comparing, we are using our greater than symbols and our less than symbols or equal sign. And ordering is either least to greatest or greatest to least, depending on what the directions tell us to do. And with decimals, that can sometimes get a little bit tricky. Just like when we had fractions, when we didn't have common denominators, it made it a little bit harder. With decimals, it's really looking at place value. So these are just some steps of what to do when you need to compare or order decimals. So take all your numbers and stack them, meaning that they're right one underneath the other, and line up the decimal points. So that's really the important part here, is that the decimal points are all in a line. And then what you do is add zeros so that all the numbers go to the same number of digits. So it makes it a lot easier for our brain to look at something that looks similar. So you can see these all now go to thousandths place instead of those holes over here where they didn't all go to the same place. Then what you do is you compare each place value one by one. If a number is the same, you move to the next place. So obviously they're all 4s here. That doesn't really help us, so we're going to move to the next place values. Now when we get to the 10th place, we can see that we've got 2 that have zeros and we've got 2 that have 8s. So we now know that these 2 are going to be bigger than these 2 because they have an 8 in that place value of tenths. So I'm just going to X these out for right now, and I'm going to go back up here. So I know I've got a 4 in the ones place, an 8 in the tenths, and then I hop over to the next place value. I've got a 0 and a 2. Well, what does that tell me? That tells me that this is the biggest, and then this is the next biggest. Okay, so once I have placed those, then I can go ahead and I can look at the other 2. So I've got 4s, I've got zeros, so I'm still having the same number. Then I hop over here and I see an 8 and a 0. Well, the 8's going to be bigger than the 0, so I now know that this would be the 3rd biggest and this would be the smallest. So depending on what the direction was, this says order the numbers from least to greatest or greatest to least. So if it was least to greatest, it would go 4, 3, 2, 1, like it does over here. If not, we would have it go 1, 2, 3, 4. So you just have to make sure that you are really reading carefully. That is probably one of the biggest mistakes that I see kids make, is they don't read carefully and they list things in the wrong order. All right, let's turn the page to page 18. So what we're going to do now is we're going to follow these steps. So I'm actually going to zoom way in, so I've got some space. You'll have more space than I do because you're not on the computer. So it wants us to compare and put these in order from least to greatest, and we've got 4 numbers. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write them up here in my corner. And remember, they want us to line up the decimal points. So I'm going to line up all my decimal points. And oops, that's a typo. That's supposed to be a 9. Okay, so I have all my decimal points lined up. Real nice right here. You can see that everything's lined up by place value. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some zeros on. So I'm going to, oops, I don't want that. I'm going to add on some zeros here so that everything goes to the same place value. Okay, now I'm going to start with my first digit. Well, I've got 2 2s, I have a 3 and a 0. This makes my life pretty easy because I already know the one with the 3 is the biggest. It doesn't even matter what the rest of the digits are. And I already know that the one with the 0 is the smallest. So that makes my life really easy because now all I have to do is figure out these other 2. So I have 2s here. I'm going to move to the next place value. I've got 3s here. Doesn't really help me. Moving to the next place value. Now I have a 4 and a 0. Well, we know 4 is bigger than 0, so that means that this is going to be the second biggest. This would be the third biggest, and then we already know 4th. So when I order them from least to greatest, smallest to biggest, I'm going to go 4, 3, 2, 1. So 0 and 996 thousandths, comma. Make sure that you always separate those numbers with commas, otherwise they're going to look like one giant number. 2 and 3 tenths, and I don't need to put all those extra zeros on. I can if I want to, but I don't have to. Just remember which ones were originally there and which ones weren't. 2 and 34 hundredths, and then 3 and 3 tenths. Okay, so you write them down, you line them up, and then order them from least to greatest. Now, sometimes they're not going to give you 4 numbers. Sometimes they're only going to ask you 2 numbers, and they're going to ask you to compare. So remember, to compare, you're writing greater than, less than, or equal to. So you're still going to follow the same process. You're going to go digit by digit. So if I look here, I have a 6 in the hundredths place, doesn't help me, so I go to the next digit. 5 in the tenths place, doesn't help me. 6 in the ones place, doesn't help me. 0 in the tenths place, 2 in the tenths place. So that helps me. I know that if I've got 2 in the tenths place versus a 0, the 2 is going to be bigger. It doesn't matter what the rest of the number says. This 3 is not bigger than this 7, but it doesn't matter because they are in a smaller place value. So once you figure out a place value that is different, the one that has the larger number in that place value is going to be the bigger number. So 656 and 7 hundredths is less than 656 and 23 hundredths. Another way to think about this is money. Would you rather have $656.07 or $656.23? Not a huge difference, but hey, money is money, right? All right, so what I want you to do right now is I want you to pause and I want you to compare the last of these decimals. So I want you to look at digit by digit by digit and see if it is less than, greater than, or equal. And then once you're finished, unpause the video to see how you did. All right, how did you do? So you should have greater than, less than, equal to, greater than, greater than. So if you go digit by digit, and you can see I underlined them in different colors just to make it stand out a little bit. When you go digit by digit, you realize that very easily you're able to see which one's bigger or smaller. The rest of the digits don't matter. And then just remember here, anytime I add zeros to the right of a number, as long as it's after a decimal point, I can add as many zeros as I want. It's not going to change the value of the number. So 8 and 200, I'm sorry, 2,000 10,000ths is the same value as 8 and 2/10, because I can add those zeros on forever. All right, so far we have covered place value review, how to talk decimals, comparing and ordering decimals, and now we're going to move on to rounding rules. So if you need to take a break, that's cool. Go and take a break and come back, and we're going to finish up with rounding and adding and subtracting. All right, so rounding, we've talked a little bit about this year as well. So the thing that you need to remember is the rounding rules. And when you look to the right, that is what's going to give you the direction. 5 or more, add one more. 4 or less, leave it alone. 4 or below, leave it alone. 5 or above, give it a shove. However you want to remember it, if the digit in the right place value next door is 5 or more, you're going to bump that number up. If it's 4 or less, you're going to leave it as it is. And then everything else after that becomes a 0. Okay, that's the part that kids kind of struggle with. So once you round it to that place value, everything else disappears, becomes a 0, and then leave any numbers before that place value the same. So let's take a look at one here. So 78 to the nearest tens place. Okay, so we know from our background knowledge, zoom back in here, that this is tens place, this is ones place. So if I want to round to the tens, the 10 is going to look to the right over to the ones place. That 8 is higher than 5. That's going to tell that 7 to bump up to an 8, and then everything after it becomes a 0. So that 8 becomes a 0. If I had 782 and I wanted to round to tens place, I would still look to the right. I'm going to look to that 2. That 2 is going to tell that 8 to stay itself. It's just going to stay an 8. So that's still going to stay an 8. The 2 is still going to become a 0. And remember that the numbers before the rounding place value stay the same. So 782 rounded to the nearest tenth place would be 780. The 8 stays the same because the 2 told it to. The 2 turns into a 0. The 7 stays the same. All right, the next one, 429 to the nearest hundreds place. So again, we've got hundreds, tens, ones. 4 is going to look to that 2. That 2 says, hey, 4, stay who you are. So it's going to stay. And then everything to the right of that becomes a 0. So 429 rounded to the hundreds place is 400. Okay. Now, what happens with decimals? Well, decimals do the same thing, same rules. So round 3 and 273 thousandths to the nearest hundredths place. So here I've got 1 and tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Okay, so first thing is you've got to know those place values so you can figure out which digit we're looking at. Well, if we're rounding to hundredths, we're looking at this 7. He's sitting in the hundredths place. He's going to look to that 3. That 3 says, I'm smaller than 5. So the 7 is going to stay itself. The 3 becomes a 0. Everything else before it stays the same. So 3 and 27 hundredths. Or if you want to, you can keep that 0 on. Now, in a whole number, you have to keep the 0 on, okay? Because if I didn't put this 0 on here, it would just look like an 8. So when you're looking at whole numbers, those numbers have to turn to zeros. When you're looking at decimals, you don't have to put that 0 there because it's going to be equivalent either way, okay? So 904 and 6/10 to the nearest whole number. So whenever you see nearest whole number, they didn't give us a place value here. It is another way of saying the ones place. Okay, so another way of saying ones is whole number. So the 4 looks to the 6. That 6 tells that 4, hey, I'm higher than 5, bump on up. So that becomes the 5. The 9 and the 0 stay the same. And then that 6 has become a 0. So I could easily write this like this, 905 and 0/10. But I don't have to if I don't want to because it is the same value. Okay, so what I want you to do right now is I want you to pause. There are 4 here that I would like you to complete on your own. So they're going to give you the place value that they want you to round to. Don't forget the rounding rules. You have them on the same page to your left. I have to scroll up to see them. So underline the digit in the rounding place. I want to see you doing that. looking right next door, remember the rules, and then you change all the numbers to the right of the rounding place to 0. Any numbers before stay the same. So go ahead and pause the video, and you're going to do these 4 examples and then unpause and see how you did. All right, how'd you do? So rounding 107 to the nearest tens, 0 is sitting in the tens place. It's going to look next door to that 7. It's going to tell it to bump up to a 1. So the 0 becomes a 1, the 7 becomes a 0, and the 1 stays the same, so 110. Round 1,345 to the nearest thousands place. So 1 is in the thousands. It's going to look to that 3. That 3 tells the 1 to stay the same. Everything else turns to a 0. So 1,000 would be the rounded number. This one is a little tricky, and I didn't want to tell you what to do ahead of time. So I'm curious to know how we did. So this one's a little tricky because that tens place, that 9, is being told to bump up. Okay, so in every place value, we know that the number can only go up to 9 because once it hits 10, it carries over into the next place value. That's way back to basic first and second grade addition and subtraction. So when that 9 bumps up, it becomes a 10. But the 0 is what's going to stay in the tens place. And that 1, you can see I wrote it up here in the corner, that 10, or that 1 carrying over that 10, is going to bump over into the ones place. So think about it. If I had $4.90 and I added 10 cents to that, and then added those together, I'm going to end up with $5 because the 9 plus the 1 is going to be a 10, and I have to carry that other the 10 over into the next place value because it can't sit in the same place. So you should have got an answer of 5 or 5 and 0 tenths. So if you didn't, make sure that you understand why you did not, because that's a common mistake that kids make. All right, 73 and 213 thousandths, the nearest whole number. And remember, whole number means ones place. Oops, and I did it wrong. Oh my gosh. Erase. Hope you didn't get the same thing as me. I wasn't paying attention. I was doing it too fast. So it should have been 3 looking to that 2. And that 2 is going to tell that 3 to stay the same. So it's going to stay a 3. And then the 7 stays. And then it's just 73, or I could do 73 with some zeros after it if I wanted to. Glad I caught my own mistake there. All right, so that's rounding rules. And again, this is all review. So it should all be coming back to you. All right, last thing we're going to do today, and I know you've been sitting a while, we're going to talk about adding and subtracting decimals. Okay, so on the next page, these are the rules when you add and subtract decimals. So the first thing is to line them up. You've got to line up your decimal points. This is super important. If you do not line up your decimal points and your place values are not where they need to be, you are going to get the incorrect answer. Okay? Drop it down means that you're going to drop that decimal into your answer. You're just going to drop it straight on down because it is not going to move. Oops, getting cut off. Okay, and then you're going to fill them in, which means you're going to add, fill them in, sorry. That means to add zeros to make them all the same place values, and then add or subtract last. Okay, so this again should be familiar territory for you. You've been doing this for years. All right, so you're going to be doing some word problems. I'm going to do one with you just to show you what I need to see, and then you're going to complete the word problems on 21 and 22 on your own. They're either addition or subtraction, and I want to make sure that I see the 4 rules. Line them up, drop it down, fill them in, and add or subtract. So the first one says, one day, 3 kids in the neighborhood went fishing. When they were done, they weighed all their catches. One of the kids caught 12 and 54 hundredths pounds of fish, and another one of the kids caught 9 and 62 hundredths pounds of fish. When the third kid weighed his catch, he saw that he caught 15 and 25 hundredths pounds of fish. How many pounds of fish did these 3 kids catch that day? So these 3 kids is telling you that it wants to add. It wants all of their catches together. So we're going to add. So I'm going to zoom in so that I can show the steps. So the first thing is to write the numbers and make sure that I'm lining up my decimal points. So I have 12 and 54 hundredths. I have 9 and 62 hundredths. and I have 15 and 25 hundredths. Okay, so step number 1 is taken care of when I write, as long as I make sure that my decimal points are lined up. Okay, then my next step is I'm going to draw my addition here in my line, and I'm going to drop that decimal point right down into my answer. So it's going to stay right where it is. To fill in here, I don't really have to fill in much. I just have a 0 to put here so that everything lines up. I got lucky for this one, and then I'm going to add. So 4 plus 2 is 6, plus 5 is 11. So I put the 1, and then I carry that 10 over. 5 plus 1 is 6, plus 6 is 12, plus 2 is 14. So I drop the 4, again, carry the 10 over. 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 9 is 12, plus 5 is 17. Drop the 7, carry over the 10, and then 1, 2, 3. Now, remember, we're looking at word problems here. So I want to see a sentence of your answer. So how many pounds of fish did these kids catch? The kids caught 37 and 41 hundredths pounds of fish. Okay. All right, so what you are going to do is you are going to finish the rest of these word problems doing the same thing. Notice how I annotated, thought about, looked at what my clues were, so whether I was adding or subtracting. I followed all the steps, and I have a sentence. I will be looking for this. Your assignment will be incomplete tomorrow when I check it in if you don't have all the notes. So everything that I wrote down up here since the very beginning, you should have on your paper. If I don't see these things on your paper, I'm going to mark your assignment incomplete. I do not do notes for myself. I do them for you. Okay. And then I need to see 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 completed. So I am going to be checking pages 14 to 22 when you come into school on either Tuesday if you're a cohort 2 or on Thursday if you're a cohort 1. So I hope that you were paying attention. I hope that you were writing down. If you weren't, you better go back and rewatch and write everything down. I will see you soon.